So, Kevin, I'll turn to you here on set. Can you help us understand where things stand? Because we've heard the president both say the fight will continue. It's also close to ending. They are also doing diplomacy, but we still don't know with who. I think there's more questions than answers at this point.
What do you mean? You didn't understand the president's intent
you're right.
there? I mean, I felt like the speech was that somebody went back in time and just copied and pasted all of his tweets in the last month and put them all together, because it wasn't really new, and it was as muddled as you guys said. It's filled with a lot of untruths. The fact, take the regime change claim, for example. I remember on day one him calling on the Iranian people to rise up and overthrow the regime. So that may not be it may not have been the initial target, but it was pretty soon that they targeted the leader of the country. Mm-hmm. So yes, it's still muddied and muddled. It's still unclear, and I'm not sure what the American people think about it. I noticed, too, the line that most Americans are opposed to this, and I saw the NBC polling, but if you look down into that poll, it said like 80% of MAGA supports this. They will literally follow this man to the moon, to Iran. And I, as a national security expert and journalist for years on this, too, I often would question, kind of, be careful with polling the American people about intricate, detailed foreign policy questions. It does indicate how messages are getting through to the people, but I think you'd have to do a lot more educating to those respondents before you got a real answer of, do you really support what the president's doing here?
But I think that's part of it, right?
Yeah.
Because this is a speech that I actually thought would have worked if it was done on day 2 of the war,
sure,
as opposed to month heading into month 2, what is week 5, right? So for a public that is very much in the minds of Republicans, because it's a midterm year. We know that Trump is looking at the markets as well as the polls, and then also doing this conflict. When you take those layers together, where does that leave you?
Well, it leaves you with a confused electorate and questions like this on television that we're asking. I think, remember, too, even the European allies didn't know this was coming.
Right.
But the military knew. You can't just press a button and say bomb Iran tomorrow. Like, there actually has to be months of planning that go into this. So the military knew this was coming, and they were preparing that option for the president. But nobody else knew. And this administration, especially between the White House and the Pentagon, has had, frankly, horrible public relations and messaging. The Pentagon is not doing regular press conferences. They kicked out the press corps. They're not doing what we did back in the day, which were daily off-camera gaggles where you could learn from the Pentagon. Here's what's really happening overnight over there. What questions do you have? Let's make sure we're on this. We're not chasing rabbits down the wrong holes, and we're communicating to the American people. That's part of the mission of the Pentagon. It's all been pushed to the president, like with everything in this administration. It's all on him. Yeah. So he could have given this speech on week 1. I think we'd still be confused. He could keep giving the speeches. I don't think it's the speeches would help. It's that the policy is confusing because he doesn't know what he wants, or if he does, he's still not communicating it clearly, other than these targets of, we know they want to degrade nuclears, degrade missiles, degrade the Navy. Okay. Other than that, you can't say the war is over if the war's still going, right? The war is over when the guns fall silent, and they're not silent.
And they're not silent. Plus, we're also seeing assets be moved in and out of the region. And so, David Rohde, I know you're back with us. Talk about what you saw in the speech last night, and pick up on a few of the threads that Kevin Barron is here talking with us about the muddled messaging, and then, of course, the way that allies in the region might be interpreting it, having not been read in on the front end.
So it's what's surprising is that just politically, look, the president is a very effective politician, but he opened himself up by saying, we've decimated Iran's missile forces. What does Iran do this morning? They fire at Israel and multiple countries in the region. He says we've decimated Iran's Navy. What's happened this morning? There's been no change in terms of the Strait of Hormuz. Oil prices are up by $10 a barrel. And in terms of allies, there's a meeting today in London where they're trying to come up with some sort of plan to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. But I want to point out, I looked last night at the perceptions of Trump in Europe, and he has created such a poisonous atmosphere that it's political suicide for leaders from various countries to join this war. The view of Donald Trump disapproval numbers, 81% of Brits disapprove of Trump, 76% of French, 84% of Germans. And so when you have created that kind of mess by trying to seize Greenland and this other insults of the Europeans, that's why they won't do it. They're not going to commit political suicide for their own careers to help Donald Trump and Iran after not being consulted before the war started.
So already tense relationships with European allies. Put on top of that, questions about if Trump is going to end up pulling the U.S. out of NATO or trying. That's another dynamic that we'll get to. But David Noriega, I want to talk about the dynamics on the ground where you are. How did this message land in the Middle East? And have you seen any daylight between the way that President Trump framed this war and the future of the conflict, even over the course of the next few weeks, and how people like Netanyahu are thinking about what the next few weeks look like when it comes to the conflict with Iran?
Well, Ali, since I've been here, what I've heard from military and political officials and ordinary Israelis is that they do not believe there is or should be any daylight. They actually use that term specifically, no daylight between the United States and Israel in this war. They try very hard to convey the notion that this is a joint war, which obviously goes against statements that we heard early in the war from the likes of Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance, suggesting that the U.S. followed Prime Minister Netanyahu into this war, and which doesn't match up with the vast gulf in the public opinion between Israel and the United States. This is not a popular war in the United States, but it is and remains a popular war in Israel. The reason for that is because whereas for the United States, the military and other objectives of this war are sort of illegible to much of the public, here in Israel, they're quite legible. It's territorial. The Israelis that I speak to, again, officials and ordinary Israelis, think that Iran poses a serious threat to Israel in itself and also via its proxies, primarily Hezbollah in Lebanon. And they say that the goal of this war should be to neutralize that threat. I want to play you a little bit of an interview that I did with an IDF reservist up north, right on the border with Lebanon. This is an older guy. He served in the military when he was younger. He was called back in to serve as a reservist. And I asked him, well, you'll see what I asked him because I think the question's in this clip. Take a listen. When do you think this conflict with Hezbollah will be over? When will you consider it done?
זה קשור לאיראן, ברגע שיעשו שם את העבודה באיראן, ואיראן לא תעביר כספים ותממן את חיזבאללה ונחתוך את הציר בין חיזבאללה לאיראן, זה יהיה game changer במצב מול חיזבאללה.
So essentially, the war is not over, Ali, until the Islamic Republic of Iran and its proxies are defeated and no longer pose a threat. But that has not happened. Hezbollah is still fighting. The Islamic Republic is still in power. As David Rode pointed out, we're still getting missile barrages from Iran here in Israel almost every day. There was a child injured in central Israel yesterday. So the general perception among political and other officials here is that they want the war to continue until those objectives are completed. And as we've been discussing, those objectives have not been completed, Ali.
And Alisa, as we talk about the quest to end the war, there's been a lot of back and forth on diplomatic efforts and where they stand. The president didn't explain why the U.S. abandoned talks so quickly back in February. He also didn't offer new details on the state of negotiations, nor did he clear up the role Israel played in launching this war. And at one point in his remarks last night, he seemed to undercut his entire message. I want to play for you that and then talk on the other side.
We're now totally independent of the Middle East, and yet we are there to help. We don't have to be there. We don't need their oil. We don't need anything they have, but we're there to help our allies.
So, Alisa, what do you make of that argument? And has this fight actually helped our allies so far?
Well, it hasn't helped our allies, especially those in the region, those in Europe, those in Asia, all those who are feeling the impacts of this war very concretely. And Americans aren't immune to it either, right? Markets have reacted already to the president's speech. Oil prices are up, and that's going to continue to impact Americans every day. The cascading impacts of this economic crisis haven't even begun to hit them. But what our allies in the region are feeling is they didn't want this war, but what they want on the other side is something conclusive that makes them safer. What our European allies want is not a Russia that's benefiting from this war. And in fact, what we see is Russia getting sanctions-free, higher prices in oil while the war continues. And our partners in the Indo-Pacific are seeing their energy prices skyrocket through the roof. So what the president said last night doesn't give any comfort to allies and partners in the region or beyond.
You know, David Rode, the other thing I'm thinking about is that the president last night again told allies that it would be easy for them to secure the Strait of Hormuz. At another point, he seemed to suggest that it would just reopen on its own. But if it's so easy, why isn't the U.S. doing it now or anyone else?
It's not easy, and former military officials have told me, I mean, you've got miles and miles of coastline that would need to be secured by U.S. ground troops. And then even if you take a strip of right along the coast of the strait in Iran, it's possible for Iran to fire drones and missiles from dozens, in some cases hundreds of miles away, and sort of barrage American troops while they're sitting on the ground there. We can shoot down some of those drones, but it would be a really complicated mission. And then you have boots on the grounds that would have to stay there, U.S. forces securing the Strait of Hormuz for months, if not years. So the president of France said today that he doesn't think there's a military way of seizing control of the Strait of Hormuz just because you're surrounded, in essence, by Iran to the north. So it's not an easy task. And then just a basic planning thing. I still don't understand why there aren't more American ships, destroyers, other small ships that could be acting as escorts. There's been weeks to organize something like that, but instead we just have most U.S. ships are far off into the sea. They're carriers launching airstrikes as they should be. But again, how could this not have been planned for before this war or even in the last several weeks?